So today we're going to be talking about high-tech computer access. This is a three-part series that we're doing, and this particular part of the series is going to be focused on the Apple operating system, particularly as it pertains to iPads and iPhones. We would really need a separate presentation just to focus on the Mac as well, because it is a little bit different. Although a lot of the features that I'm going to be talking about today are also available with the Mac. So if there's a feature that you see me talk about, there's a very good likelihood that it would also be available on the Mac operating system as well. But perhaps we'll do another series and we can just focus on just the Mac and give it its own special space. So anyways, today we're going to be talking about the Apple iOS. And again, I am the FAAST Northwest Regional Demonstration Center Coordinator. And our headquarters is here in Tallahassee, and I also happen to be located in Tallahassee as well. Okay, so some of the accessibility features we're going to be talking about as it pertains to iOS is we're going to be talking about vision, physical and motor, and hearing. And so as far as vision is concerned, there's a lot of different options. And one thing I do want to say about Apple products is they have a very loyal following, particularly in the vision community. And that is because they were one of the first to make their devices fully accessible by those who are visually impaired. So if any of you remember when the iPhone first came out, it was pretty revolutionary. There were no buttons, no anything to give you the ability to touch with tactile feedback to understand what it was that you were hitting on the phone. And so one of the things that they did to help individuals who need that kind of feedback is they worked really hard to make their devices accessible. And they've kind of always led the forefront on accessibility, and they've kind of set the bar and the standard for making devices accessible as far as smartphones and tablets and computers and stuff like that. And so that is one thing I will say, is that other companies are kind of always trying to keep up with what it is that Apple's doing, the new innovations that they make. Generally speaking, Apple does kind of stay at the forefront. And because of that, they've had a very loyal following in the disability community, particularly as vision is concerned. Okay, so some of the vision options that you have with the iPhone and the iPad would be VoiceOver. We're going to talk about that. You have zoom options. You have a magnification option. You can turn your device into a magnifier. You have people detection, display and text size, motion, spoken content, and audio descriptions. So there's an array of different options that we're going to get into and we're going to talk about a little bit more. So VoiceOver is a gesture-based screen reader. And so you can use your device even if you can't see the screen. And one thing that is really cool is you can basically have your screen dimmed to the lowest setting to the point where it's virtually turned off to conserve battery life. And if you're a person that doesn't need to see the screen, then it essentially gives you a double or triple the battery life, and you can still use your device just like you would normally and get all the benefits and features of your smartphone. And so VoiceOver gives you audible descriptions of what's going on your screen. It could be the battery level, who's calling, which app your finger is on, and you can also adjust speaking rate and volume as well. So when you touch the screen or drag your finger over it, VoiceOver speaks the name of the item that your finger is on, and that would include icons or text, and it allows you to interact with the item, such as a button or a link or a navigation or some other item. And then you can use VoiceOver gestures, and we're going to talk a little bit about those as well. So when you go to a new screen on VoiceOver, it plays a sound, and then it selects and speaks the name of the first item on the screen. Typically, whatever is in the top left corner is where it's going to start. And then VoiceOver will tell you when the display changes to landscape or portrait, and when the screen becomes dimmed or locked, and what's active on the lock screen when you wake the operating system. So again, VoiceOver changes the gestures that you use to control iOS. When VoiceOver is on, you must use VoiceOver gestures to operate iOS. So it's one thing to remember. If you do turn it on and you're not familiar with how VoiceOver works, you might have a harder time turning it off because now you have to use your phone or your iPad and control it through VoiceOver. And I'm going to talk a little bit also about a practice mode so that you don't lose control over your device, that allows you to practice the gestures without fully activating VoiceOver. Okay, so to turn on VoiceOver, you can do it a few different ways. One way would be to summon Siri and say, turn on VoiceOver, or if you need to turn off VoiceOver. Another way to do it would be to triple click the side button if the device has the Face ID option, or if it doesn't have that option, then you triple click the home button. And then you would go into Control Center, go to Settings, Accessibility, click on VoiceOver, and then turn that setting on or off. So there's a few different ways you can do it. Any of those methods work, and it would just be dependent on which method works best for you. So you can also, again, like I said, learn and practice VoiceOver gestures. That means that you can go to the special part in the settings, you can go to a special area, and it allows you to practice those different gestures without fully implementing VoiceOver on the device. So you would still go to the same place. You go to Settings, Accessibility, and VoiceOver. You would turn on the VoiceOver and then tap VoiceOver Practice and then double tap to start. And so you could practice the following gestures. You could do tap, double tap, triple tap, swipe left or right, or up or down. And this would give you the option to practice without, again, fully implementing it, so you don't necessarily lose control of your phone and not understand how to make it work again. When you're done practicing, you would just tap done, and then you would double tap to exit. You can also use a voice, a Braille display with VoiceOver. And to do that, you would connect your Braille display. You would have to turn it on first, and then go to Settings, Bluetooth, turn on Bluetooth, choose the display that you want to use, and then go to Settings, Accessibility, VoiceOver, and Braille, and then choose the display. I don't know that every single Braille display is compatible, but I do know they have a very extensive list on their website, and it would be most of the most popular ones are all compatible with the iOS devices. So to see the Braille commands, you can tap more info and then tap Braille commands. And then you can also, another cool option is you can output closed captions in Braille. So that would allow the closed captions to go to the Braille display. And to do that, you would go to Settings, Accessibility, VoiceOver, and Verbosity. And you would choose Braille display, or sorry, you would choose Braille or Speech and Braille. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the other accessibility features, zoom and magnification. And so you can zoom in on the device itself, and you can also use the device itself as a magnification glass to magnify devices. One thing that I love about that is a lot of these handheld magnifiers, they just perform the one function. You know, it's if you have an electronic handheld magnifier, it's usually only a handheld magnifier, and that's generally it. Some of them have optical character recognition built in, some of the newer devices. But a lot of those devices, you're looking at spending $600 to $1,000 on a device. Why not just have that device on a phone that you have already spent $600 to $1,000 on, and have a bunch of other things you can do with it as well? So that's one thing I love about that option being built in to the iOS system. Again, other devices have it as well. Android has it as well. But again, it's a great feature, and it's a money-saving option as well if you're having to use a handheld magnifier. And also, it saves you on space. You know, if you're carrying that separate device around, that's just one more thing you have to have with you, one more thing you have to find in your bag. If you already have it on your phone, then chances are you probably have your phone ready available, and you can just use your phone. Okay, so zooming in on the screen. So in many of the apps that are available for iOS, you can zoom in or out of the specific items. You can double tap or pinch to look closer in photos and expand web page columns in Safari, for example. You can also use the zoom feature to magnify the screen no matter what you're doing. So you can magnify the entire screen, that would be a full screen zoom, or you can magnify just one part of the screen with a resizable lens, which would be a window zoom. And you can also use zoom in conjunction with VoiceOver. So to turn on zoom, you go to settings, accessibility, zoom, and then turn on zoom. You can adjust all of the following items. Follow focus, that would track your selections, the text, insertion point, and where you're typing. You could do smart typing. That would switch to a window zoom when a keyboard appears. You can use keyboard shortcuts. That would control zoom using a shortcut on an external keyboard. You can do a zoom controller. That would turn the controller on, set the controller actions, and adjust the color and the opacity of the screen. You can also set a zoom region. You can choose full screen or just window zoom. You can set a zoom filter. You could do like inverted colors, grayscale, inverted, low light. The variety of filters that you have traditionally are available through the iOS system as well. Then you can also set the maximum zoom level by dragging this slider to the left or the right to adjust that level. Okay, so then you can also double tap the screen with 3 fingers if the feature is turned on, and that would, under the accessibility shortcuts, you could turn on zoom. So to see more of the screen or do any of the following, you would just adjust the magnification. You would double tap the screen with 3 fingers, and then you keep your fingers on the screen after the second tap, and then you drag up or down, or you triple tap with 3 fingers and then drag the zoom level on the slider. To move the zoom lens, you would drag the handle at the bottom of the zoom lens, and to pan to another area, you would drag the screen with 3 fingers. If you're not familiar with doing that, it is a little bit confusing at first, but once you get used to it and accustomed to it, it does become second nature. Most of us are used to just dragging with 1 finger and then using 2 fingers if we want to like zoom in on an app, which is the way most people will use it. But if you do need a bigger screen all the time, it is a really nice feature to have the triple tap with the 3 fingers. Okay, so to adjust the settings with the zoom menu, you would triple tap with 3 fingers and then adjust any of the following. You would choose the region, the resize lens, the filter, and the controller. Okay, so to use the zoom controller, you can do any of the following. You can show the zoom menu, then you can tap on the controller. You can simply zoom in or out by double tapping the controller, or you can pan when you're zoomed in and drag the controller around. Okay, the other part of that, what we talked about a little bit earlier, was the magnification. So you're using your device as a handheld magnifier. Again, that's really handy for not having multiple devices that perform the same function. And then you also save money because you only have to have the one device. You just put your money into the one device instead of putting it into 2 separate devices. So to set that up, you'd go to settings, accessibility, and then magnifier. You would just simply turn on magnifier under that menu, and then it would add magnifier as an accessibility shortcut. So you can use accessibility shortcuts to access and turn on the magnifier. You can use that to adjust the zoom level, drag the zoom control slider to the left or right. Again, that on this slide here, we can see that you have a little magnifier lens in the bottom left side of the phone, and you have a plus or minus sign that gives you the option to increase the magnification. You also have a flashlight over here. We'll talk about that in a little bit. You can adjust the brightness of the screen, the contrast, various color settings and whatnot. Okay, so we talked a little bit about that. If you want to adjust the image, you can, again, tap the brightness button. We looked at that button there on that previous screen. You can tap the contrast button to control the contrast. You can change the color filters by clicking that filters button. And if you need more light on the item itself, you can tap on the flashlight button. So if you do need to, for example, review an item, you don't want to sit there holding it over the item itself for a prolonged period of time, you can actually freeze a frame. That would be the center button here. So you'd click on that freeze frame button. It's similar to taking a picture, but it does not actually store the picture. It just simply freezes the frame, similar to what a lot of handheld magnifiers do. If you did want to freeze more than one frame, so you wanted to have either more frames of the same image or different frames of different images, then you could use this multi-frame button here in the, would be located on the bottom right-hand corner of the phone or the tablet that you're using whenever you're using the magnifier. And then to return to the live lens, you would tap end. And another neat feature about magnifier is it can be used to set up for people detection. And so that would be useful for maybe you're going on a crowded bus or you're getting in a subway or something like that in a crowded area, and you just want to be aware of who's around you. You don't want to get in someone else's space and you don't want someone else getting in your space. So you can use that to kind of be aware of how close people are to you, and maybe be able to politely ask them to maybe step out of your space, or maybe yourself would be able to move just a little bit out of their space if you needed to. One thing that Apple does say is they do not recommend using that to navigate your environment. While you probably could somewhat navigate your environment, it really comes down to a safety issue. They really don't want you trying to walk around with your phone trying to figure out where you're at, just because of the potential of getting hurt or something like that. And then also they don't want you going into dangerous places trying to use your phone to navigate when you shouldn't be. But it is a nice feature to have and nice to be able to know who's around you when you need it. Okay, so again, using display accommodations, you can change the text size and the display properties. To do that, you would go to Settings, Accessibility, Display and Text Size. You can select to have bold text. That would just display your text in bold letters. You can select to have larger text. You can select the button shape. That particular feature changes the settings to underline text that you can tap on. So if there's text somewhere that you can click on, then it would underline it for you to let you know that it's clickable text. Then you can also have the labels, the on-off labels be indicated with a 1 or a 0 so that it's just easier to know whether or not the switch is turned on or turned off. Again, going on with the display accommodations, you can also reduce the transparency. That would make it to where it's just easier to see. A lot of the fancier features on phones as we've come along through the years has been one of those things that they've added is making the background slightly transparent because it just looks more visually appealing. However, for some users, that's not ideal. So you can actually turn that off. You can reduce the transparency or take it to the point where it's completely eliminated and there's no transparency at all. Another feature would be increasing the contrast. That would just, again, change the contrast, making things a little bit more legible and whatnot. You can differentiate without color. So that would replace the user interface items that rely on color to convey information with alternative options. And then you could smart invert or classic invert. The smart invert colors reverses the colors of the display, except for images, media, and some apps that use dark color styles. If you use the classic invert, I believe it will also invert images and media as well. So you have color filters. You tap a color to apply it, and then you would just adjust the intensity or hue by dragging the slider back and forth. You can reduce white points, so that would reduce the intensity of bright colors. You can also adjust the auto brightness, so that would as you know, auto brightness automatically adjusts the screen whenever your lighting changes in a room. Maybe you go outside, it might adjust the brightness. This would be beneficial if you need it to be as bright as possible all the time. Or if you don't really need to use the screen that much, you could basically turn it all the way down like we mentioned before to conserve on battery life if you're not going to be looking at the screen much anyway, or you don't need it to be bright and you're only going to be using the tap features, then you might just want to go ahead and save on battery life and just turn the brightness all the way down. So you could also apply display accommodation effects to only the contents of the zoom window as well. So if you're using the zoom window, all of these display accommodation effects could be applied specifically to the zoom window and then not affect any of the rest of the screen. Okay, so now we're going to talk a bit about reducing the motion of screen elements. If a person has a sensitivity to motion effects or screen movement, they can reduce those by changing some of these different effects that are in the system. So again, a lot of these effects are designed to make the operating system more appealing as far as appearance goes. It just looks smoother, it looks cleaner, it looks nicer, but that's not always ideal for everybody because maybe some visual impairment or some other necessity that they have because it's distracting or whatnot, they might not want some of these effects. So you can actually turn them off. One of those effects that's popular to turn off would be the parallax. What that is when you scroll up and down through your device, it'll usually scroll different things at different speeds. So maybe it might scroll something in the background at a slightly different speed than what's in the foreground. And again, that's just for visual appeal. And for some people that might be distracting, or it might just be harder to read if it's on. So you can actually turn that effect off. You can turn screen transitions off completely. You can turn off the Siri animations. You can turn off the auto completion feature for typing. And you can also turn on and off the animated effects and messages. So to adjust those settings, you would go to Settings, Accessibility, and then Motion. And again, you can reduce motion. You can prefer crossfade transitions, so that would reduce the motion of user interface controls that slide in and out when appearing and disappearing. You can change the autoplay message effects. That allows the message app to automatically play full screen effects. And then you can autoplay video previews. So what that setting changes is when you're in an app, such as YouTube or whatnot, it can automatically start playing the previews for you. Some people want that on, some people want that off, but it is an option where you can turn it on or off. Okay, so you can also have iOS speak what's on the screen to you. You can speak the selected text and you can have typing feedback as well. So to change that, you would go to Settings, Accessibility, and then Spoken Content. Under speech selection, that would, if you select that option, that allows you to hear the text you have selected once you tap the speak button. Speak screen, that would hear the entire screen. You would swipe down with 2 fingers from the top of the screen. Once that's enabled to have it start speaking the screen. Again, generally speaking, it's going to start from the top leftmost portion of the screen. You can change the speech controller. That would change how quickly it speaks. And you can also change how you access it. So you can make it accessible through different options, such as being on the quick access part of your screen. So you can just tap it on your screen. You can access it through Siri. You can access it through Speak on Touch, which is another feature built into the system there. You can also highlight content. So the iOS can highlight words, sentences, or both as they're spoken. You can change the highlight color and style as well. Okay, for typing feedback, you can configure feedback for one of the on-screen and extended keyboards and choose to speak each character, entire words, auto corrections, and auto capitalizations and typing predictions. If you wanted to hear that, you would go to Settings, General, then Keyboards, and you would turn on Predictive. For voices, you would choose a voice and a dialect. And again, you can set it up for English, you could set it up for American English, you could set it up for Australian English, or however you wanted to set it up. There's a number of different settings in there and different dialects that you can change it to. And of course, you could change the language entirely to Spanish or another language as well. The speaking rate, you can drag the slider, and then that would just, left is going to be slower, right is going to be faster. And then pronunciation, you would dictate or spell out how you want certain phrases to be spoken. So another nice option is you can turn on audio descriptions, and that would be for any video content you have on your device that it does include an audio description. So to turn that on, you would go to Settings, Accessibilities, Audio Descriptions, and you'd simply turn on audio descriptions. And so the audio descriptions, again, it's only going to work if that particular media has had audio descriptions enabled and it provides it. So if it doesn't have it, then it's obviously not going to be able to do it. But if it does have it, which most modern day movies include that as an option with audio descriptions. So if it does have it, then you can enable it and it will give you an audio description of what's going on the screen on the movie. Okay, assistive touch. So there's a few ways to turn on assistive touch. One of the easiest ways is to just simply ask Siri. And again, with all of these different options, there's usually going to be more than one way to turn it on and off. Generally, the way that I tell people is to go through settings, accessibility, and whatever option they want to choose. But again, that might not be the easiest way for somebody. It might be easier to just simply ask Siri to do it. Or if someone is not able to ask Siri, you can usually triple tap the home button, or depending on what device, and I talked about it down here. So if you have Face ID in the iOS, then I believe you would double click the side button. And then if you have just a standard iOS without, well, I say standard, but if you have a slightly older iOS that doesn't have Face ID, you would triple click the home button, and that would bring up those options for you. Okay, so yeah, you can change a bunch of different options as far as the assistive touch goes. You can change single tap, double tap, long press, 3D touch, how all of those interact with the user. You can change all of those options. You can create new gestures. So if you want to change how swiping up works on the screen, or swiping down with 2 fingers or 3 fingers, if you want to change what that does, you can change it. You can make new gestures, maybe add like a 4-finger gesture or something like that, just depending on what the user needs and what you need to have your user be able to do. The idle opacity, that would be adjusting the visibility of the menu button when you're not using it. So you could either keep it fully visible if you needed to, or you could make it disappear almost entirely when you're not using it. Okay, so switch control. Any of these following devices can be used as a switch. You can use an external adaptive switch. That could be a Bluetooth switch or a switch that's specifically made for the iOS system. That would plug in directly to the Lightning connector on the iOS device. You can also use the device screen as a switch. That would mean that when you tap the screen, it triggers a switch option. And you can also use the device's front camera, and that would enable you to move your head left or right while you're facing the camera and trigger the switch. Okay, so before you add an external switch, one thing that a lot of people will complain about is that their switches stop working with iOS devices. And generally when that happens, it's because you might have an older switch and then Apple doesn't update to their system. And generally it's for security purposes that they've disabled previous options that they maybe once had, and then your switch stops working. That can be very frustrating. So, and sometimes there's not always a way around it. Sometimes you just have to get a new switch, which really kind of sucks. But generally speaking, you can add the switch again. But one of the things you have to remember when you're adding switches is you kind of have to follow the same process every time. And that's where people can get frustrated, is because if they don't follow the process, a lot of times it won't add their switch back in there, or it won't add it in the first place. So before you add an external switch, you need to connect it to the device, following the instructions that come with the switch. And if it connects using Bluetooth, then you need to pair it with the device first. To do that, you would turn on the switch, go to settings, and then go to Bluetooth, turn on Bluetooth, and then tap the name of the switch, and then follow the on-screen instructions. After you have added the device, so the switch, to the Bluetooth, then you can go to Settings, Accessibility, Switch Control, and Switches. And then you can go ahead and add the new switch or choose the switch source. You can assign an action to the switch once you're in those settings. And in order to ensure switch control functions correctly, you must assign a switch to the select item action and another switch to the move to the next item action. So you generally have to have two switches, depending on how you have it set up. If it's set for scanning, then you can sometimes get away with just having the one switch, because it will scan and then you select it and then it scans top down usually first and then left right after that. Another option for controlling your device would be voice control. We talked a little bit about that with Siri, but you don't necessarily have to even use Siri to use the voice control options. So you can go to Settings, Accessibility, and Voice Control. You tap Set up Voice Control and then tap Continue to start the file download. So once you do that, it's going to download a special part of the app, and it's going to add that feature in after you've enabled it. So you do need to be hooked up to the internet whenever you do that, otherwise it's not going to be able to download it. Once the download is complete, the voice control icon will appear in the status bar to indicate voice control is turned on. Again, that is separate from Siri, and that's why it is a separate download. So under voice control, you can set the language and download languages for offline use. You can customize the commands. That would be view available commands and create new commands. You can change the vocabulary, which would mean you teach the voice control new words. You can show confirmation. That would be when the voice control recognizes a command, a visual confirmation appears on top of the screen. You can have it play a sound. So when it recognizes a command, an audible sound would be played. You can have it show hints. That would mean that it shows you what commands are available and it gives you suggestions as you're maybe starting to say a command. You can have an overlay that would display numbers, names, or grid over screen elements. And if you have a device with Face ID in the operating system, voice control wakes up when you look at your device and goes to sleep when you look away from your device. So when voice control is turned on, you can say commands such as the following: open control center, go home, tap item name, open app, whatever name it might be called, take a screenshot, turn up volume. And if you wanted to learn more voice control commands, you could say show me what to say or show commands. And again, that voice control is separate from Siri, so it is something that you can add on to your device in addition to having Siri. Even though Siri is very capable usually of controlling the device, it just gives you more options. And of course, you can still use Siri in conjunction with voice control. So with hearing devices, a lot of modern day hearing aids are able to be paired with your device through Bluetooth, which is pretty cool. It's a nice feature and a nice option to have. Of course, if you don't have a hearing aid that can pair to the device, you can also use wireless headphones like AirPods or any other compatible headphones, and pair those devices with your iOS device. So first, again, similar to the switches, you would have to connect the devices via Bluetooth to your iPad or your iPhone, and then you would have to make sure that Bluetooth is turned on. Once it's connected via Bluetooth, then you would go to Settings, Accessibility, and then Hearing Devices. You would close the battery doors on your hearing devices. That just depends on the type of hearing device. That usually be for like the special hearing aids that can connect, as opposed to AirPods or whatever. They don't obviously open the battery doors on those. When the names appear below the MFI hearing devices, it could take a minute. Then you just tap the names and respond to the pairing request once you see that on the screen. You can stream the sound from the microphone on the device to your made for iPhone or iPad, and that's the MFI hearing devices, or you could also use AirPods. This can help you hear better in some situations, for example, when having a conversation in a noisy environment. So what you would do with that is essentially use your iPhone or your iPad tablet kind of as a microphone. So you could either place it closer to that person who's speaking, or you could have them hold it. You could have them hold it right up to their mouth if they needed to, if it was that noisy. And of course, you would put the hearing device in your ear. If you have a hearing aid, you'd obviously already have it in your ear. Or if you had AirPods, you could go ahead and put those in. Then again, you would open the control center, tap the hearing device button, tap your hearing device or AirPods, and then tap Live Listen. If you do not hear or see or hear the hearing devices button, you can add it to the control center by going to Settings, Control Center, and then choosing Hearing. And then, of course, you would just position the device near that person who's speaking or whatever sound source you're trying to amplify. Okay, so those are some of the features that are the accessibility features that are built into the iOS system. I hope that you guys learned something new from this, and I hope that you guys who are watching in the future learned something. And again, if you do have questions, my name is Jesse Hansen. Feel free to reach out to me and contact me. I do have my information up here on the screen. The phone number here is 850-224-4670. We also have a toll-free number at 888-309-2233. Or you can email me as well at jhansen, JHANSEN, at familycafe.net. Or of course, you're also welcome to reach out to headquarters, and I do encourage you to reach out to headquarters if you do have any questions or problems or issues, or just want to know where to go to find out more. Again, their phone number is 850-487-3278, or their toll-free number is 1-844-353-2278. And you can also email them at info@faastinc.org. That's FAASTINC.org. Now we do have some time. Does anybody have any questions or anything that they wanted to ask?
It does look like there's one in the chat.
Okay, let's look at it and see. Okay, so the question is, are all of these settings available via voice commands? Yes, so again, there's multiple ways to get to the settings. One of those ways is to do it through the voice commands. Again, you can do it through Siri, or you can also download that, like we talked a little bit earlier about the voice commands app. Once that feature is installed, you can also control it through the voice commands, and it would be available through voice commands. And again, that's one thing that's really great about Apple is they try very hard to think 2 or 3 steps ahead and make it to where you can get to a setting 2 or 3 different ways, particularly as far as accessibility is concerned, because they, again, I feel like they kind of have this approach. Well, I don't feel like, I know that they have an approach of designing for, you know, usability, and part of that design process includes individuals with disabilities. So making things accessible, designing and implementing with that in mind from the start. And, you know, a few years ago, it was not uncommon for accessibility features to just kind of be thrown on as an afterthought, and to not really be part of the design process. And so then you go into an accessibility feature and it's buggy, it doesn't really work because it wasn't really designed with the rest of the program, in conjunction with the rest of the program, so to speak. So it's a great thing because I feel like because Apple has pushed that forward, it's also kind of forced a lot of other companies to design with that in mind. And so your Android devices now, it's always part of the design process is how do we make this accessible? And then your Windows devices, that's part of the design process. How do we make this accessible? And of course, again, Apple kind of has always been at the forefront of that, and that's always kind of been part of their thing, at least since they started designing iPhones and whatnot. That's been part of their design process. Again, if you guys do have questions, we do welcome you to reach out to us, and we certainly hope that you enjoyed the presentation and hope that you got something out of it, and hope that you come back to us in the future for any of your needs. And again, I do want to thank everybody who was here today, and thank you for coming.